Hola, soy Litzy La Bomba Dilene, boxeadora profesional de México, y estás viendo el show de Todd Atkins, en donde verás y escucharás a grandes talentos del boxeo. No te lo puedes perder.
That's one, two, one,
Yeah, I
two.
got it. I got you. Can you hear me?
Okay. I can hear you now. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I got a guy here. He's usually pretty. He's kind of a regular on my channel. Um, Hamza, you probably seen James Werme on our show. Um, he did. He's done a couple really interesting interviews on my show already. He said he can't hear me now. Oh, he can hear him now. Okay, yeah. So, James was one of the only people to cross over, from SEG to ZUFFA, and knows a lot of stuff, obviously. So, um, if you have any questions for him, how you been doing, man?
Everything is great. Holidays well underway. Friends, family, kids, everyone's fine. And yourself, Todd? It's great to be back here. Great to see you again. Thank you for
Yeah,
having
yeah,
me.
uh,
How are you?
yeah. It's all doing well. It's always good to talk with you. Um, yeah, myself and Miguel, we're gonna kind of do something live every Thursday, Thursday night kind of thing. But he might have something that came up. He's always here. So Costa Rica though sometimes.
Is that where he lives?
Yeah, sometimes the he can have
I
some.
see.
Hamza, do you have any questions for James while we're talking here? He's gonna put. They've been putting questions in the chat, so people that want to jump on.
Am I supposed to be able to see the chat or no? Just
No,
you.
no, you won't see it, but I can
Okay.
ask you the questions. But are you still doing the stuff with who was it you said you were doing some stuff with from was it pro wrestling?
No, no. I haven't been involved in wrestling since 1995.
Yeah, but weren't you doing some stuff with Jerry Lawler?
Oh, me? No, no.
Wasn't
I
you?
would no, no. I was part of well, there was an angle with Jerry Lawler and Bret Hart while I was at the WWE that they brought in a model to be Jerry's mom, and one of my cooler assignments back in the day was to chaperone her for the day. So that was a really fun, interesting assignment for a young guy. Uh, they thought they would give me a throwaway job, and it ended up being a really fun day and evening. Her name was Keelan Kernuck. They brought her in for one day. It was when Brett and Jerry were doing the smelly foot angle, if anyone remembers that. Fairly ridiculous, but it was really cool. Cool assignment for the young kid.
Smelly foot angle.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
so here we
The
go.
diehards will remember it.
Oh, okay, yeah, I did ask a question actually. I want to ask him when Lorenzo and Frank took over, did they really try to do Frank versus Tito too? And how did they do the contracts when they let John Peretti go? Were you familiar with the contracts at all, or?
Yeah, of course. I basically worked with John, and we did all of the undercard. My boss at the time, the owner Bob Myrowitz, he would personally handle the main event usually, because that was where the real money was being paid out. So he was involved personally with those. To answer the first part of the question, you know, the Fertitas, Dana, myself included, we all wanted Frank to keep fighting. And surely that would have probably involved a Tito rematch. Why not? But that was not what Frank had in mind for his future. Frank very much wanted to be a businessman, promoter, producer. Frank would have preferred to come on in like my job or like Dana's job, but he was not excited about fighting, at least in the UFC at that time. So that's really where the rift and why the rift happened between Zuffa and Frank. We wanted Frank to fight. Frank didn't want to fight. Ultimately, a year and a half later, Frank goes over to Japan, makes a ton of dough on a 3 or 4 fight deal, which is great. Great to see Frank finally get paid what he was worth. Um, the second part of that question was about ZUFFA and John Peretti. ZUFFA elected not to hire John. I've heard a couple different versions of the story. You'd have to ask him, but ultimately, I don't think those parties would have gotten along well anyway. Um, and Zuffa just decided to go in a different direction. Whether they told John he wasn't going to be hired or whether John told them he wasn't interested in the gig, I'm not sure, but I do know that Joe Silva was very active and very influential in the office, and Dana was very active with regard to booking of fighters and working on contracts. That's what he did primarily. Joe was at his side the entire time. Um, the original Zuffa contracts probably looked a lot like the SEG contracts, at least at the beginning. Um, or at least the SEG contracts provided the framework from which the ZUFFA contracts began. It was when ZUFFA took over, that's when I kind of stopped working directly with the fighters, directly with the contracts and booking of the card. So I can't add too much insight other than that.
Yeah. So, what we had talked a lot about like kind of those years, and me and you were both kind of like big fans of Frank. I think he's an underappreciated fighter, especially today.
For sure.
And when he walked away, he kind of walked away at a time when, yeah, it was like he was on the verge of maybe
Well,
crossing over into something much bigger.
yeah, and Frank would pop up with little acting gigs, and he had his public speaking and training career. But yeah, Frank was awesome. Frank was the best I ever saw from my time. Sadly, during Frank's peak with the UFC was kind of our low with regard to viewership. So unfortunately, Frank was doing incredible things in the octagon in front of a very small audience. And he wasn't making the money that he thought he deserved. And Frank was hardcore, devoted athlete and trained like a madman. And that wears on you. And like I said, I think Frank wanted to transition into businessman. The stuff he ended up doing with Strikeforce, really, um, becoming a part of their promotion production on a business side as well as a fighting side. So yeah, I mean, Frank, good guy. Also, we got along great. We hung out a lot of great times with Frank. All over the world, New Orleans, Tokyo, Point South, Augusta, Birmingham, Biloxi, at Lake Charles, but those are the places that Frank was fighting in front of small audiences, both in the arena and on pay-per-view. So we would have loved to have Frank at a time when we were playing to the full universe. He was a fantastic champion and a great ambassador for the sport. He could do everything. He did it with flair, spoke well, looked great, um, and really up the level of athleticism in the octagon, I think.
Were you privy to any of the conversations that were going on to try? I assume they would try to keep him around.
Yeah, yeah. We talked a little bit about this in our last interview. Me and Frank were both in the station casino. So when
Right.
the Fertittas bought the show, they set me up in the station casino. I lived there for a few months until I got settled. But they brought Frank out for a couple of weeks to do like private lessons. So he was training, I think, probably Dana, definitely Lorenzo and Frank. Yeah, charging them a lot for private lessons. So we'd have dinners and lunches, and we saw each other a lot during that time. And yeah, we wanted Frank to fight, and Frank didn't want to fight. And the role Frank was kind of describing that he wanted for himself was, occupied by, me on the TV side and Dana on the fighter side. So sadly the parties parted ways. At that time, he was still doing the color commentary in the booth, and he was excellent at that. But he wanted more, and at that time, Frank positioned himself as a superstar. He was a superstar of the sport. He wanted to be treated and paid that way. Who could blame him? He thought he was the best in the world. We all thought he was the best in the world. And he wasn't making great dough, frankly, in the UFC. And he wasn't happy, I guess, with the plans that maybe Lorenzo and Frank and Dana laid out for him, which I am sure included returning to the octagon as a fighter, which he wasn't necessarily interested in.
Were you there when Vitor returned to the UFC from Pride?
What year was that?
I'm not even sure. I'd have to look it
The,
up.
well, the last Vitor, Vitor was a constant problem. It was always something with Vitor. He seemed to get sick or get hurt, or things would happen. The last memory I have, vivid memory of Vitor, is when we were prepping for the Mandalay Bay show in September of 2001, and it was supposed to be Tito versus Vitor, and then like a couple weeks before, Vitor dropped out, and we had to add Vladdy Matsushenko to take his place.
It was UFC
Had
33 is when he returned. Was that your last one, right?
33 was my last one, but he didn't end up. He was supposed to fight Tito in that, but he got scratched because of I don't know if he was sick or injury. I don't know, it was always something with Vitor, whether it was I don't know.
Arm injury is what it says.
Yeah, he cut himself, right? He cut himself or something. Yeah, he needed stitches. Yeah, I remember because I can see the poster that we had to scrap, and I made the commercial that we had to scrap, and I had gone out to LA and done a big feature on him in training camp, the interview and stuff, which we had to scrap. It was a giant pain in the ass.
No, what Hamza was asking is, do you remember if it was expensive to get him back, or were you privy to any of that?
Oh, I don't know because it would have been because Vitor, we scratched, like I said, we scratched him at 33. 34 was MGM. I don't think he fought on that. 35 was Mohegan Sun. I don't think he fought on that. And that was my last show. So
But
I
I mean,
was
his
not.
return signing must have been before 33.
Oh, yeah. I mean, he was. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, he was booked for the 33, which means they had signed him prior. I don't remember any particular drama or difficulties or, they liked Vitor a lot. They thought he had a lot to offer. Um, as a pure striker at that time, he probably would have been, I don't know, light heavy or maybe even middleweight. I don't know.
Because what Hamza's saying is it must have been expensive to sign him back from Pride.
That depends. It depends on if Pride wanted to re-sign him. It depends. It depends on if Vito wanted to continue to fight in Japan, which is not easy. A lot of these guys, they hop for the dough and they get over there and they realize that it is a completely different world and a lot of things are out of their control. And yes, the money was
Yeah.
better, but maybe it's not as safe as it was in the UFC nest, frankly.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think, a lot of people don't realize that when,
Well,
people that live there or know that, but
ask Mark Coleman, ask Mark Kerr. I mean, those guys, they stayed, and Don Fry even they stayed because Doe was great. But I think if at any time we had made close or matching offers, they would have come home. Actually, I know they would have come home in a heartbeat because like at one of the first Zuffa shows, suddenly all those guys that had jumped came back and wanted tickets and were sitting ringside. So I remember, I think it was the first or second Zuffa show. Those guys could smell the money. And I remember Coleman was there, Kerr was there. Kerr brought his two managers that that we used to call the hairdressers. And yeah, all the guys that had jumped were sniffing around, hanging around, hoping to come back. The big payday is great. But American TV, American pay-per-view, fighting at home, being able to have your family ringside, that's meaningful. And those guys I know would have loved to come back. I know Coleman, Mark used to tell me all the time because he was around because Kevin was still fighting with us and Mark was dying to come back, but we just couldn't couldn't match the dough. It just didn't seem worth it at the time.
Oh, really, Mark? You couldn't match?
No, because Mark had won the Grand Prix, and he had a big fight with Vanderlei, and Mark was doing commercials in Japan, and he was a star. Those guys are good at making stars, and so the money was great. Um, but those hometown boys, they'd rather be at home. They'd rather fight in the octagon. But I understand it's pro athletes. You got to go where the money is best during the short window you have.
Okay, he's got another question. How did they? Do you know when they started the lightweight division?
Um, yeah. Well, Jens. So you go back to like Jens and John Lewis. So lightweight division would have been. I'm trying to think of the first lightweight fight. At least by show UFC 27, 28. At least by 99, 2000, because Jens fought and John Lewis fought and Dennis Hallman fought. And those guys, I think, were all fighting at 150, 155, something like that, which would have been lightweight at that time. And I don't believe we actually crowned a lightweight champion until Jens beat Uno, which was a ZUFFA show. So, so yeah, it had to be right around the end of SEG, which was 99, 2000, and the beginning of ZUFFA, which was 2001. Well, the establishment of the lightweight was definitely under SEG, because Jens broke Lewis's jaw in the first round of that was UFC 28. That was the first New Jersey show, first Taj Mahal show done under SEG. For all of you keeping score out there.
Do you remember how they started it?
I think John Peretti was probably pushing for it. John always pushed to expand the weight classes and weight divisions so we could get quality guys of different sizes in there. So I would definitely say that was probably something that John had probably been working on me and Bob probably for a couple of years before it ever happened. But probably that came from John Peretti.
Yeah, because that was the question that was being asked in the chat. If you remember how the lightweight division was started.
Yeah, I mean, we had quality guys. John could get a hold of quality guys. They were just smaller, so we had to, just like we evolved with everything. Let's do this. We can get these smaller guys, exciting guys, that we knew. We knew Jens because he was training with Pat, obviously. Um, so we knew we had quality guys available, and like I said, I pretty really pushed for additional weight classes.
Yeah.
Because John also didn't like big discrepancies in the weight, in fighter weights. So, those two, the lobbying job that he did was based on expanding the talent, expanding the weight classes, and making it safer, and reducing the difference between two fighters, or potential difference for two fighters against each other.
I know we talked about Tito and Frank early. Maybe tell me about like, you know, Zuffa takes over. They want to push Tito. What it, what were you privy to at that time?
Well, a lot because me and Tito were tight from the SCG days. After Frank leaves, Tito steps up and he beats Vanderlei. He's the champ. He's the most marketable guy we have on the roster. He's in Southern California, so we're pushing Tito hard, and he's getting the biggest money in the organization at that time. Tito was buddies. Obviously, Dana was Tito's manager, so they were tight. Chuck as well. And through Dana, of course, Tito becomes tight with Lorenzo and Frank. They loved him. He was the coolest and he was the toughest. And I'm sure Dana has told the story, but like one of the first things they did, or this was maybe still while Dana was managing and Tito was under SEG contract, they went up to Big Bear for a training camp, and Tito and Liddell are sparring, and Chuck like knocked out Tito or knocked him down, and Tito was like curled up in a ball, and Dana tells a story that they looked at each other like, oh shit, did we bet on the wrong horse here? But no, Tito was their guy. They thought he was the most marketable face of the organization. We led with him, even though he was usually interview challenged, shall we say? But he looked great, and he's a powerhouse, and he was grounding and pounding guys at that time. But whatever Tito wanted, Tito got. He was the cool guy. And remember, these guys were fans, so I don't mean to demean or in any way. It's like meeting one of your heroes or getting to hang out with the captain of the football team and suddenly being backstage at this cool event. And so yeah, we pushed Tito to the lead, but they also invested a lot in guys like Randy and Pedro and Carlos Newton. Um, they wanted everyone to be famous. They wanted everyone to be superstars. But Tito was special. Tito was special, obviously, because he came in under Dana's management. He came in as the champ. Um, so yeah, he was very important to them, and he spent a lot of time in Las Vegas during those days.
Why do you think the UFC let Randleman go?
Um, well, what's what's Kev's last fight? I mean, he must have lost his last fight, right? So in general, um, I'm trying to think. I think so Kev loses to Chuck. I don't know if that was a 34 or 35. That was one of my last shows. Um, you know, Kev was not an exciting fighter. Um, that's not an that's not a criticism because a lot of times he won, but he wasn't. The wrestlers
It's wild because he had so much ability, like athletic ability. It was crazy.
he did, but I don't think Kev liked to fight. And you can be I was gonna say you can be the greatest athlete in the world. And Kevin was one of the greatest athletes I ever met. And the things I saw him do in training and just hanging around stuff and the body on him and the build and the strength and the agility. But you know, it takes a special breed to crave violence. It takes a special breed that likes to fight. You know, it's interesting because the wrestlers, right, they think they like to fight until they get punched in the face. But it was the real psychos that existed were the kickboxers. Those guys love to fight. Those guys love to get hit as much as they love to dish out punishment. I remember Pedro telling me, that, and Chuck would say the same thing, that part of the fun was getting hit. Part of the fun was getting kicked. And, I'm not really even into it until I get whacked in the face. So it's just such a different conditioning in the training and the lifestyle. How many big wrestlers, once they get tagged on the chin, they just curl up. Actually, I was watching, oh, it was Tito versus Rashad Evans. I just saw it randomly on social media, and I had never seen that fight head to toe. So I decided to watch it. And it was classic Russell stuff where, Tito was able to bully him around and throw his weight around. But as soon as he got tagged a couple times, it's turtle up because they're just not used to it. Um, so I think in general, the wrestlers were not as exciting as, Kev maybe wasn't as exciting. And after a few losses, remember, he was the champ, so he was at a certain pay scale. He was at a certain pay level. So, a promotion at some point has to decide whether or not the investment continues to be worth it. And after a few losses, someone already making big dough, let's move on.
Let's check this one. Why do you think they let Chuck fight in Pride first in 2001 and not Tito?
Well, Tito was a champ and he needed to be protected, but Dana is a risk taker, and Dana is a fight fan, and they believed in Chuck just as much as they believed in Tito, and Chuck wanted to do it, and he was fired up to do it, and those guys were very competitive and confident, And it seemed like a great hype potential. It seemed like a great way to get Chuck more notoriety and exposure, and they were confident in his ability, confident in his skills. Yeah, that was kind of a ballsy thing. But really, what do you have to lose? Chuck wasn't a champ at the time. It was, good payday for Chuck that you don't want him to miss out on, and a chance for the UFC to beat Pride. I'm all for that. We're all for that.
Right, and I think maybe they were more confident in him than Tito.
Well, like I said, that they realized they saw that Chuck was every bit, if not more, the fighter that Tito was right off the bat there at that training in Big Bear. And, I could tell. So I remember, so okay, so Fertitta Enterprises, which was where the office was located, was on Sahara, I think, in downtown Vegas. In the basement, there was a full-on fight gym that a lot of pro boxers used to rent when they came to town. I remember Arturo Gatti used to rent it every time he fought in town. It was had the ring, had everything, beautiful, beautiful facility, and that was in the basement. So we used to work out there all the time. That was where we all worked out in the office. And whenever fighters came in, they worked out there. And, I remember sparring sessions. So back in the day, this would have been Tito, Chuck, Rico Rodriguez, and Dana. And the best boxer in there was Dana White. Um, Dana used to tag all those guys. He was just as good. He was a better boxer than Tito. He was a better boxer than Rico. Chuck was a little different because Chuck was, more of a stand-up guy and had such a long reach. Chuck is really tough to handle for anybody. But yeah, those guys were not great boxers. They were not great stand-up guys. And when you did straight up boxing exercises and drilling, you could see that. Despite my attempts in the features we did to claim that the striking and the boxing has gotten so much better, and he's training with this guy and working out with this guy, it was easy to see. Even a boxer at the level of Dana, and Dana grew up boxing, and he knew how to handle himself in the ring like a real boxer, and he was a better boxer than those guys. If that had gone through when they were going through all that foolishness where Tito wanted to fight Dana, uh, it would not have ended well for Tito in a
You
straight up
think so?
boxing match. I know so. I saw it happen. I saw Dana outbox Tito all the time.
Right, but if in a situation where they're not pulling punches, you still think it would have.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I was thinking,
Dana's.
okay, this guy Tito, he's at the height of his athletic ability, and that might even things out a little bit. But you don't think it would have?
I don't, because that wasn't Tito's strong point. As much as we hyped him up, and he did the same. Did Tito ever win by strikes ever?
Against Ken Shamrock, remember?
Ken. Okay, so Ken was like
Yeah,
older,
yeah,
and as I recall, Tito threw him around for a while. Remember,
yeah.
Tito is bigger and stronger than everyone at that time, which gives him tremendous advantage. Add to that the wrestling superiority and the balance and the leverage. I think Tito was able to skate by on those skills for a long time before ultimately being exposed by, I guess, the first big loss was Chuck, other
Yeah,
than
like
Frank.
these guys here, they don't believe you. They're thinking, like, really, Dana was that much?
Yeah, that's listen. It's no shit. I I remember I was cutting together as a
James wouldn't
joke.
lie about any of this stuff. He's just
I
giving you
saw
his
it. I
honest.
saw it firsthand. I witnessed it firsthand. I wish I still had the tape because I shot a lot of it, and I would leave it in just to kind of try to get a chuckle out of Dana, and he'd be like, "Take that out, take that out. We can't have that." Where Dana was a boxer. He was an amateur boxer. He grew up boxing, and it's different. Tito was a wrestler. He was an amateur wrestler. If they have gotten down on the mat, it would have wiped the floor with them. But there's something to be said for court savvy, right? Knowing the game, footwork, positioning, rolling. Yeah, Dana outboxed Tito all the time. Dana outboxed Rico all the time. like I said, Chuck was a little different because Chuck was a stand-up guy, so I wouldn't put him in that. But Dana White can box. Dana White's a tough guy, and I'm not just saying that. It's the truth. I saw it firsthand.
Well, let me ask you about this because they had this little series. And what did you think of that series? What was the purpose of it, you think, in hindsight? I mean, Tito pulled out, and me, I always felt like it was something to legitimize Dana in the eyes of the average person.
You're talking about when Tito wanted to fight him?
Yeah, yeah, and they made that little series on Spike TV leading
Oh
up
yeah,
to.
yeah, okay, yeah, okay. So wasn't that so? Again, that was I think that was initiated by Tito, and that was maybe when he had Jenna in his ear, or who knows? This is after Tito had broke from them, I believe,
Yeah,
and Tito was pissed about. I'm sure it was money, and what he put in a clause in the contract that he would fight Dana
yeah,
without thinking that A, that's a no-win situation, and B, he should know better because he was in there with him and he knows he should have known better. Yeah, I thought it was completely idiotic and dumb and not thought out well. And I question whomever was in his ear, whomever his management was at the time, because if you beat the promoter, you don't gain anything. And if you lose to the promoter, wow, now everyone's second guessing everything.
yeah.
So
But if you don't show up, that's bad too.
yeah, yeah. So you don't even so you don't let it get from here to here, right? Yeah, he should have never said anything. And, I almost think that Dana took a little bit of the high road. And again, I don't remember everything. This is many years ago, right? But I think Dana kind of took the high road. Dana didn't come out and say some of the things that I'm saying, like he was a better boxer and he's happy to do that. He could have said those things and he'd be right. Um, But yeah, I don't think that was a good move by Tito. It made no sense. It was obviously emotion driven. He stood nothing to gain from that situation.
What did you do with the footage that you shot?
I honestly, when I moved out of New York, there's a good chance I tossed it. Because I would a lot of the stuff I used to shoot like second camera. I'd always have a crew with me, but I would have my high eight or my super eight just to get another more angles and another film like look, more grittiness or just a different look. Um, and then when I get back to the edit room, a lot of times I would just put that into our library. And the tapes, I think history has swallowed up those tapes. When I left New York, I don't remember taking a lot of stuff. That's it. I don't have anything from those days. I don't have any of my passes or signs, posters and stuff. I didn't keep a ton of stuff or collect a ton of stuff, but unfortunately, uh, I don't have anything really, which sucks because I don't even have pictures. Because we didn't have cell phones with cameras and we didn't, it was work for me. So I wasn't like taking selfies in the octagon and stuff. That's why finding that footage, that behind the scenes stuff from Dojo TV was so exciting because I had never gotten to see myself working, you know, in the job. Just so everyone knows, I recently sent Todd some links. I was doing a deep dive on some of my UFC days and stumbled onto this company that called Dojo TV that followed Pat Miletich around during the first Taj Mahal, first New Jersey show, and the last Japan show that I did. So got to see a lot of great stuff, weigh-ins and press conferences and dressing rooms and really cool stuff that I had never seen or thought about or even, remembered in 20, 25 years. Really exciting stuff, really cool.
This guy still doesn't believe you, but what I'm trying to tell you, this guy Munch, he comes on my shows a lot, and or on the chat sometimes. But James isn't trying to suck up to Dana White. It's not like they're talking
Oh
anymore.
no, I'm not in any way. This is
I'm
I'll say.
surprised to hear him say it too. But he's not the guy who would do that. I can promise you.
Well, you guys know that Dana has a background, right? As a kid, a teenager, he boxed and he knows how to box. Yeah, he was a better boxer than Tito Ortiz. He was a better boxer than Rico Rodriguez. In a straight up boxing match, I would take Dana, I don't know, 9 out of 10 times.
I know I've been in that situation because when I was in Japan, one of the wrestling coaches we had was probably in his 50s at the time, and we were all, in our 20s, maybe early 30s at the oldest, some of these guys, and he kicked our butts on a regular basis. And it wasn't because he was some athletic freak or genetic freak, super strong. His technique was better than ours.
Yeah, and that's usually what it came down to. Like, Dana was able to, jab combinations. He was in that scenario. Dana looked like the real boxer. And I'm not trying to take anything away or kiss anybody's ass. I have nothing to gain either way. I'm telling you because I was there, laughing. I was, so many crazy things were constantly happening in the UFC. And yeah, my new boss, the new head of the company, tagging the middleweight champ, the light heavyweight champ at will was like, what the fuck is going on here? Yeah, Dana can box, and Tito was learning how to box, right?
I always wonder what that. I mean, you answered it already, but that whole series, I was wondering, like, is there more to this? Because Dana was just Dana. Remember, they were trying to they had him on Maxim, built like a fighter. Dana White, remember that? And
I don't. I mean,
they had him stand with the other fighters, and he'd have his black leather jacket on. He's like got a scowl on his face. They were kind of like trying to legitimize him as a tough guy.
well, I mean, Dana's a tough guy. He is a tough guy. He can handle himself physically. And remember, when I knew him, he was not cocky or boisterous or evenly overly opinionated. I'm talking about him as an athlete. I'm talking about him as a person. Dana was not the Dana everyone knows now when I knew him. And he was in there trying to help those guys. That's the thing. Dana was in there training them, trying to make them better. And like you said, you had an instructor who at any time he wanted could take you out. Most instructors at any time they want can take out their students. And this was kind of that type of situation. Dana was in there sparring with them to make them better, to give them a look with a guy that knows how to handle himself like a boxer. As far as the series goes, I mean, those were the Spike days. So, first big success. I'm sure they were anxious or eager or welcoming of any type of offshoot. So, this smells like a great little offshoot. We can get 3, 4, 5, 6 episodes out of this. So maybe at that point they decided to play it up more. Um, but again, I'm pretty sure it was Tito's idea, and I'm pretty sure he demanded it be in the contract that they wanted him to sign. So I think they were going along with his bad idea and decided to milk it for all it was worth. Why not? You have a great storyline, even though it ended up not coming off, but it gives you a chance. Dana's as much of a personality as any of the fighters. And time has proven he's a larger personality than any of the fighters because he is the constant. And he has become such a personality and such the face of the sport, not just the organization, but of the sport.
Yeah, that's what I felt like the series maybe was trying to do is make him the face. Tito pulls out, it makes him more. Oh, Tito was afraid to fight him, so this
Yeah,
guy's so awesome.
yeah. So, and listen, that's not the worst type of thinking. That's not the worst idea because the fighters are going to come and go. The fighters are going to become free agents and they might jump. Who can we build that that isn't going to go anywhere? That's always going to stick to the company line. That's always going to be there on time and say the right thing. Hey, you see it in the Spike show. I think when they started to dress Dana, they started to style him a little bit. So yeah, that's part of showbiz, and that makes perfect sense to me, given the position he was in. And remember, the Fertittas were very much in the back. They did not want to be out front.
Why
So
is
they,
that? I never asked you that. Why do you think that is?
um, when you come from such a successful family, older, not old money, tradition, the gaming world, the gaming licenses, you are not about publicity. You're almost above it. And, those guys didn't want to be having to answer questions or explain themselves or, you know,
Maybe like the organized crime aura.
you said it, I didn't, but
Yeah.
no, and again, in my year with them, I never felt anything like that. But I did feel like they had no desire to be public faces or to be famous or to be the mouthpiece or the face of the UFC. And this happened for the first and very definitive time. The interview that they always show of me introducing the world essentially to Dana at his first show. That interview was supposed to be Lorenzo, and he ended up backing out. So I think there was a little bit of temptation, but in the end, they didn't need it. They didn't want it. That's why they brought Dana along. Um, they, of course, wanted to be involved in every decision and every situation and loved the sport and loved hanging out with the fighters and getting to know them and training and stuff like that. But they didn't want to be, you know, take questions from Eddie Goldman and Joe Gold, and it wasn't their gig. They were rich, powerful guys, and maybe they felt a little bit above it or gun shy. Because even when they did that American Casino show, right? So we go to meet with the producer to do the UFC reality show, and he says, "Yeah, yeah, 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 but oh, what about this family?" Right? And they do the American Casino show. That came out first, which was I think the same as the American Chopper guy, producer named Craig Peligian, I believe, who we met with in LA about a UFC show. But he ended up doing the casino show. But even in that one, those guys, they're in the show open, but they're barely in it. Yeah, private people, and protective of their empire.
But Lorenzo was kind of he was involved to some degree. Like every now and then, he would get involved with certain guys that maybe weren't vibing with Dana that well.
Yeah, well,
And
that's because they were always in the room, right? Dana was the face and the spokesperson, but at least Lorenzo and usually Lorenzo and Frank were a part of every decision. Everything Dana did went through the Fertitta brothers as well. And if they thought they had a better chance of success of them picking up the phone, they would do that. And like I said, behind the scenes, off camera, they were involved in the fighter stuff and the contract stuff. They were involved in everything. They weren't public faces about it. Um, but I mean, Lorenzo shows up. They still went into the octagon. They still were up on the podium. So I think they wanted to be recognized and known as the owners, but not the spokesperson or face of the organization.
not having him there now, though, knowing what you know about Lorenzo and kind of his role at that time, I know you're not there now, so you wouldn't be able to compare. But I wouldn't think that Hunter Campbell is, kind of on Lorenzo's level. Different though, he's a lawyer, but
I know who that is, but I don't know him. I've never met him. I've come across him just because he's the guy that's always standing next to Dana. And what's the best way I can say it? Um, he's always standing next to Dana. Back in the day, Dana was standing next to the Fertittas. That makes sense?
mhm.
Um,
So maybe he
yeah.
could take over. Is that what you're thinking?
I have no idea. And the UFC is such a huge animal these days that who knows if one person can do it. But yeah, I don't know him, so I'm really not qualified to give an opinion.
Mhm.
But anyone that has worked side by side with Dana for a long time and paid attention and been a part of the process from head to toe, that's valuable education. Dana has been doing this a very long time, and he's good at it. So obviously, anyone that can be schooled by him is going to benefit. Versus, I don't think you wouldn't want to bring in someone that's completely foreign. The learning curve for the fight game and live television and huge arenas and fighter contracts and dropouts, and it's a unique animal. So I think you need to be a part of the world in order to take the reins of something like this.
Yeah. What's some of the things you're doing like lately that, I mean, I know you're not involved in the thing, but I know you were going to work on a project we talked a little bit about, but we might
Yeah,
keep that in the
that's
background for now, but
yeah, I was still kicking around. Often, and we've talked about this. Often people tell me I should do a podcast, and I've kicked that around, and so we'll see about that as well, which is kind of interesting. I live in Puerto Rico, and I've been approached by some people here in the last few months who are interested in starting up a promotion, which I would normally run for the hills, not listen, and run the hell away from something like that. But the team that approached me, um, pretty well, pretty good bunch, pretty well qualified bunch. So kicking around the idea of getting back in the fight game, trying to establish a promotion. There's no local promotion running shows here on a consistent basis, developing talent here on the island in the Caribbean. So I'm slightly intrigued by that. And I love to do shows. I really enjoyed my time in UFC, and I miss certain aspects of it. Um, so yeah, I got some questions for you, Todd.
sure, sure.
You talked about so you were in the service, right? That's what you were
Hmm.
in. You were in Japan.
Yes.
So were you in
And Pearl
Okinawa?
Harbor. I was stationed Pearl Harbor also, but I was
Okay, right, in
stationed in an
Hawaii.
area called Yokosuka, Japan.
Okay, where is that?
It's southern Japan. Not, I'd say maybe 30 minutes to Yokohama by train, maybe less.
Okay, so
Trying to
pretty
remember
close,
exactly. Yeah,
pretty
not.
close to everything. I remember the big base down in Monza Beach. I spent a weekend down in Okinawa, and I remember seeing the base and stuff. So you said that you went to the Japan shows, right, during my
Yeah.
days?
Not the UFC Japan shows, but
Oh,
Pride for
okay.
sure.
You
Yeah.
went to some Pride shows. Okay,
Hmm.
yeah, yeah. And were you at the same one that I was, where Sakuraba Saka kicked Vandalay? I think it was Pride 13. Would have been like spring, summer
No, the
2001.
first one I ever witnessed live was 21, Don Fry versus Takayama.
Okay, oh man.
The show
And
itself was really boring, and then that fight happened. It was very uneventful all the way to that fight, pretty much. Fedor debuted in that show. He fought Heath Herring.
oh,
Most of the
that's
fights were
cool.
kind of not all that exciting. Um,
Why do you think, I've been watching some of the Japan stuff lately, and um it's really strikes me that it feels like the intensity is just turned down a little bit. And I don't necessarily know why. The intensity is turned down a little bit and the camaraderie is turned up. Like in the behind the scenes stuff from 29, in the same locker room, on the same podium, you have got so many guys that would end up fighting each other. I couldn't believe watching it. I was like, oh my God, my mind was blown because you got Tito's there, Tanner is there, who would end up fighting. Uh, Hughes is there. Pulver's there. Pulver's there talking shit about Hallman at the beginning of the night, and then we're all riding home on the bus together drinking beers, and it's like, boys, Josh Barnett is there, and Randy and Chuck and Tito. Everyone's in the same room. Everyone's high fiving. The camaraderie was really something that struck me. So I don't know, just a comment on the
yeah,
Japan
I
shows
think
in general.
I talked to Eddie Millis. I don't know if you know who he is. He was the head of a gym called the Shark Tank in
Okay. Yeah, I remember the
Rancho
T-shirts.
Cucamonga, and
Yeah.
they appeared in TJ's shows a lot.
Okay.
And I think one of the things he said was, the guys of that era, it was kind of like a space exploration, so they were all kind of doing the same thing,
Yeah.
and that might be why there was more camaraderie because they were all kind of discovering this at the same time, and
Yeah, and then going through everything
yeah.
and the mystery of it and the distance of it. Yeah, I enjoyed that. I thought it was cool. Because like if you put that backstage in the United States, you would have had beefs left and right and trash talking and but it was like everyone was cool. It felt like a team. And seeing that stuff really brought that back. Um,
Especially
it was really
today,
cool.
you got guys who like they're more known for talking and then losing than being effective, and that's something you definitely didn't want to do back then.
Yeah.
Was
And
talk
tell
on
me,
stage and not perform.
right. Well, right. It was more of well, there was less press coverage. So I don't know, maybe there was more integrity in the fighters, and what was some of your early fights, some of your early shows and favorite fights from those early shows?
You
We
mean from
talked
the
about
early
Frank
UFC
Tito.
shows or Pride?
Yeah. No, from my time. Because
Uh,
you were watching the shows, right?
oh yeah, for sure. Well, Frank Tito's the one that I kind of remember off the top of my head because it was kind of a unique situation because there was one bar on Oahu that showed the UFC events at that time, one, and it was called Players, and it was in downtown Honolulu, and it was a small place, not real, nothing special. It was a little small sports bar, and I remember that fight. For that fight, all the people who were anybody in the MMA circle were there.
Mm.
You had like Egan Inouye was there, TJ
Oh,
was there, a lot of the
okay.
guys from like Jesus is Lord, Ray Cooper, Ronald John, these guys that were well known in Hawaii. It's like a small, but those kind of people are all there. That fight was important to everybody,
Everyone
and
came
I
out for
think
that, yeah.
everyone after it happened, I could see the look on some guys' faces, like damn, like shoot, like when you saw Michael Jordan, like man, that guy is something
Yeah,
else.
he's better. He's better. Yeah, he's the best. Yeah,
And
I mean, if we had been able to, if the full universe of pay-per-view potential, if a big arena full of people had been able to see that, how great it would have been for the sport. Um, yeah, I mean, wish we had Frank 5 years later. Wish we had Boss 5 years earlier, right? Sometimes you just miss the timing's not right with guys. But Frank carried us through those days, and we were lucky to have him.
Don Fry's fights, when he first
Yeah,
came on the scene, Mark Coleman when he first came on the scene. There's
yeah,
so many
yeah.
things you can remember,
Yeah,
you
and
know.
they all and they fought each other, right? So a lot of
Right.
times guys didn't duck anybody. Yeah, that Fry Coleman was a war. Don was great at UFC 8 and 9, and then he lost to 10. That's when Mark came in, and then Mark dominates, and then Maurice Smith comes in. I think about
Yeah, there's so
Watershed.
many special, yeah.
I think about Watershed fights. Frank Tito obviously is a watershed fight, but Maurice and Mark was a watershed fight where you saw like it was like the first time the big dominating wrestler lost. And it had probably been a year or two of dominating wrestlers, Fry into Coleman, and then Mo comes in and much like Frank, tactician, outthinks, outworks, out hustles. So those are really cool
Yeah, I just
fights.
felt like Frank versus Tito was the first fight we had in the UFC where it kind of had this, where it was bigger than the other fights that had preceded it.
Yeah, it felt that way. I mean, the way Tito had knocked off Guy and Jerry, and he flipped off Ken, which was great. So there was good beef. There was good heat going into that one. Um, yeah, yeah, fond memories from that. That was a great night in
Well,
Lake
you're waiting
Charles,
for two
Louisiana.
guys to fight, and those two guys fought. The UFC didn't have a lot of fights like that before. They just kind of happened when they happened.
Yep,
Some of your
yeah,
classics. But that one people had to wait a little while for. It was kind of brewing, and I
yep,
think that was the first time that we had got to see that.
yeah. Well, and Tito had to prove himself, right? He had to climb the ranks in that division. So that was cool. It was the way it came off, and the subplots and backstories were cool.
Hoist Ken too, same thing, but it didn't live up. The fight didn't live up to it. But I remember I
Right.
was like, man, I can't wait to see this.
Right. And that's what sucks is when that sucks when the buildup is cool and everyone's fired up and then the fight's a dud. That brings to mind UFC 9, Ken versus Severn, which, that sucked.
Yeah.
A lot of adversity in Detroit that day.
But I mean, Ken Hoist was a rematch, and
Yeah.
Ken was like one of the first stars, and as was Hoist. And
Yeah.
I think people are like, okay, let's see if Ken has figured this out yet.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
maybe he'll beat him this time.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. 30 minutes of dry humping later.
Yeah, it didn't live up to what we thought. But I did come away thinking, okay, Hoist, he couldn't
Yeah.
do anything. You
Right.
know?
Right.
So in that respect, it was the first time we had seen where he had struggled against some other guys like Chemo. He had struggled a little bit, but
Hmm.
that was the first fight where he really couldn't get any offense going at all.
Right.
You know,
Right.
so that was kind of the first time people, okay, this guy can be beat.
Anyone can lose in the octagon. Just when you think they can't lose, that's when they lose.
Because he had that unbeatable aura, and they had uh, promoted him as his family had never been beaten any fight ever in their history.
Oh
You
yeah,
know,
1,000 and oh.
yeah, yeah. So that was like the first time where we're like, yeah, this guy can get beat.
Yeah.
You know, and I
Mhm.
think he knew that because as time went on, he didn't compete in the UFC anymore because he saw the writing on the wall too. I think with the guys that were
Yeah.
coming in, it was like, damn, I can't fight guys like Don Fry and Mark Coleman, and
Right.
you know,
Right. Right. No, for sure. The sport is always evolving. Was especially at those times was always evolving, and you didn't know who was going to come out on top. I loved the excitement and unpredictability of those days. Um, yeah, really cool.
was it the now you're in Puerto Rico, so there's only a handful of people I would think who it could be that approached you, but
It's no one that's a part of
oh really?
yeah, not a part of the MMA world. It's someone affiliated with the Olympic teams here,
Oh, interesting.
a former Olympian.
It'd be good to see
Yeah,
you back in there. You
we'll
know,
see. We'll see. If the right deal approaches presents itself, you get the right funding, you're confident in the athletes you can get, and people have to show up and be interested. So it's a major undertaking. Um, we're still in the conversation stage, but it's interesting and it's potentially exciting.
have you ever met Felix Trinidad out there?
I have not. The only big Puerto Rican boxer I've ever met here while I was here was Miguel Cotto, and that was just in the airport randomly. Um, yeah, I haven't run into those guys.
That's interesting. You would think, you being in the fight community like you were, that you might have had
But
the
I'm not here.
opportunity.
Here. I'm not in the fight community. That's the thing. I really haven't been in the fight community since 2002, 2003. When I left, it was a uh, pretty definitive departure. I didn't. I went to only like a year later. I think I went to a Vegas show because I was still living out there, and then a year later they were back in Mohegan or Foxwoods, and I went to a show because I was in New York City. That was one of the greatest post-fight parties ever in my hotel room. It was awesome. It was like a who's who. I remember looking around at one point, and it was like Tito, Frank, Fry was there, David Isaacs, who was my mentor and a
Yeah,
former
somebody asked this
executive.
right quick, so I do want to ask you that. He was
Yeah.
asking what was it like working with David Isaacs?
David Isaacs was my professor. David Isaacs hired me and took me under his wing and involved me in everything that he was involved in, which was everything, and gave me opportunities that I was so lucky to receive. I loved working with David. He's one of the smartest guys I've ever met, and I learned so much from him. And I was very sad when he left in 1998. Um, was happy reconnected with him after Abbott did the Rogan interview we had to catch up. We hadn't spoken in years. So he called me. We were texting. He gave me a call. We caught up. We talked for hours. And David, one of my favorite guys ever. Probably the most important mentor boss I ever had. And, when he hired me, I had no experience in television. I had no experience in the fight game. And through his instruction and tutelage and example he set, I ended up running the show after he left in '98. So, yeah, I can't say enough about David Isaacs, one of my favorite people in the world.
Let me ask you this, because we were talking about maybe you getting into promotion. I know it's just in the talk, but what in your eyes would you do different from what you see out there today, or would you try to kind of just make it a matchmaking event, kind of similar to what the UFC does, or
I think about that. Um, from my perspective here, what I would probably do is try to really feature the local talent, and again, I would be trying to, I would be primarily, firstly, looking to establish it as a viable live event, and then try to move to television. That's kind of the opposite of what it has been in the past. But there's so much content now that there's no money to be made on TV. Basically, TV rights. People go on DAZN and Triller just so they can say that they have the potential to reach these eyeballs. But who the hell knows who's watching? There's so much stuff out there. So, in my situation, I would push the nationalism and the pride of Puerto Rico and the Caribbean, and I would try to set up things that way, I think, which is completely specific to what I'm talking about. It doesn't really apply to the macro world of pay-per-view. Who's doing pay-per-view MMA? Just the UFC, right? They're the only ones making money doing it.
it
It's
does make sense though what you're saying, because really that's what the Japanese promotions were doing. They'd have their press conferences, they highlighted their Japanese fighters. Not all those shows were big. Pride
hmm
had some big backing, but they were
hmm
all doing that to some degree.
hmm
They'd have them show up, look professional, act professional,
Yeah.
and so the people in Japan could see them.
Yeah, and that's it's kind of the low-hanging fruit is to, hey, this guy's from your hometown. Hey, this guy's from he's from our country. Let's root for him. It's a very a nationalistic approach, and that's what I would do in my circumstance. As far as the overall landscape, I mean, I can't fault or criticize anything they've done. The success is incredible. I'm proud of what they've been able to accomplish. I'm amazed at the amount of content shows that they're cranking out. I wish maybe they weren't so outspoken politically, or they chose some of their locations with a little bit more care. But that's none of my business. So, yeah.
But I mean, like, even local shows, when I watch some local shows, like they have local shows here, but they really don't do anything to promote the fighters really to the local audience. They may have a radio commercial, so and so is going to be, but you could
Well,
have a nice little press conference and make it look like they're more important than they really are.
very true. But remember, unless you're trying to set up some sort of momentum and movement and a series of shows and development of talent, what maybe you're talking about, and what I've seen, at least here on the island, is someone will do a show. It's what we would call it a one-off in the business, which is you bring in the fighters, you have 6 or 8 fights, and that's it. You're not building towards anything. You're not trying to establish anyone or crown a champion eventually. You're just kind of selling the sport for that one night, which I don't think is enough these days. People want to connect, and people want to relate, and people want story. And okay, maybe you get 500,000 people that show up just because they want to see some live MMA, but you're not going to get that on a consistent basis. unless you give them a reason to root for someone.
Yeah, I mean, like I was saying, the show here, they've done tons of shows, but they don't really do anything to kind of elevate the
It's
competitor.
expensive, man. Fighter development and putting on consistent shows is expensive. And I always laugh when people say, "Oh, you just do a few small shows and then you do a big show." It's like, no, no, no. A small show costs just as much as a big show. You need just as many cameras, you need just as many fighters, you need just as many ambulances, you need just as many ushers, and so it's like there's no such thing, and that's a barrier to entry, right? Um,
But I mean, you could throw together a press conference and that probably wouldn't break the bank.
yep, yep,
And
and
that's
hope
what I
that
mean. You make
yeah,
them look more important than they really are. Are these guys really that important in town here?
yeah,
No, but you can make them look like they are more important
yeah.
than they really are.
Well, and what you're talking about is grassroots marketing and
Yeah.
grassroots promotion, which is how I came up, which is what I learned. Um, I remember Bob Collins was one of the promoters of the WWF at the time, and Bob came from like Feld or one of the big touring shows, and he was just such a hustler, and we were tied in with this Burger King over here, and we were on this radio station here, and we had stuff in this paper, and it was all a lot of grassroots at that time. Now people they put out Instagram, they put out a Facebook ad, they put out whatever they think that's it, and maybe it is, but really to connect, you got to get in people's faces, and you have to make an impact. So, and that's hard. That's not easy. Old school grassroots promotion and marketing is hustle. It doesn't always have to be budget, but that helps. But it takes energy, it takes hustle, it takes creativity. It takes people have to buy into what you're doing. So yeah, in a different world, that's how we did it. Not so
Yeah, because I
much
was
now.
saying, like in Japan, these shows like Shuto wasn't a big show.
No,
Pancrase
and
wasn't a big
rings.
show. But they would have, press conferences at some hotel or wherever,
Well,
and
Japan
they
had.
would make it look professional. They'd have all the
Hmm.
guys dressed, well. And when you're looking at it for the first time, like me, I'm thinking, wow, these guys must be really
Big deal.
important. Yeah.
Yeah, if you think
They
back
weren't,
and
but yeah,
well, the Japanese the organizations, they took a lot of pride in that,
yeah,
and that was a prerequisite for them. Like, you would always do that stuff when you're in Japan, and like you said, there was pride, of course, and they were playing the Tokyo Dome, but there was also Shuto, and there was rings, and there was Pancrase, and
yeah,
lower level shows that did maybe 3,000 to 5,000 people, but still treated their fighters like stars and their event like it was a big deal.
exactly. Yeah. And I didn't realize these guys aren't famous. The guys in Pride are. Maybe some of the
Right,
guys in rings are, but these
right.
guys, and these are guys are great fighters, guys in Shuto and some of these shows. But
Also,
I
those
thought, seeing it for the first time, I thought, wow, these guys must be important guys.
well, and
You
and
know?
those, yeah, no, well, that's good. Perception is reality, right?
Yeah,
But those shows also they had their cult followings as well. So they were smaller and but they had schedules, they had home buildings, they had guys, right? They had guys that were repeated on the show, so you could get to know them and their stories, right? That's fighter development is a big thing too. It's when you do a one-off and you bring in 8 fights, 16 guys, and nobody knows anybody, it's like, okay, well, okay, so hopefully there'll be good fights, versus, oh, I saw that guy fight at the last show and that guy fought at the last show and they both won or he lost a tough one to that guy. And you know what I mean? When you can start to play that game in your head and become your own matchmaker and get into the show and that on that level, that ups the interest and the marketability of the event, I think.
so yeah, I think you could make, like you're saying in Puerto Rico, I think you could easily make guys famous in Puerto Rico.
Right. Right. And that would be my primary goal, is to
Yeah,
establish it as a viable live event, right? Not even worry about TV. Obviously, you always want to have a broadcast partner, but there's not a lot of dough in it these days.
and the people took a lot of pride in Trinidad before he's famous. They took a
Well,
little
that's the
private
other thing.
photo before they were famous.
That's the other thing is this is a fight island. They just did they just put 7,000 people in a small building about a half hour outside San Juan for the Matias fight. I mean, that was a big card, and it was Hearn. What's the name of that company?
Oh, a
It was
matchroom.
Eddie Hearn. It was a Matchroom promotion. It was on DAZN, I think, a Triller or something. So again, they hyped it, and there were a bunch of locals and there were a bunch of belts on the line. So if you handle it properly, I think the Puerto Rican public are such boxing fans and such fight fans, and the UFC is popular here. My kids watch it, but the bars have it um, as well. The island of Puerto Rico supports men's and women's professional basketball, men's and women's professional
Hmm.
volleyball. They have a winter league for baseball pros. So, this is a sports oriented island, and we have our own Olympic teams, which everyone takes great pride in. So, yeah, the right situation, I think it could work,
Yep.
but we'll see. We'll see. We'll see.
Yeah. That'd be awesome. Maybe you could get Miguel involved.
Maybe, maybe.
He's a Costa
We'll see.
Rican, you're Puerto Rico, you know. So.
Yeah, the podcast thing is also an exciting
Hmm.
possibility, just because through talking to you, and the few other interviews I've done, I really enjoy. I haven't thought about a lot of this stuff in a long time, and those are fun times. I can look back now and smile. So many fun, crazy, exciting things happen, and I was front row for that. And it's funny because I'll tell a story and people just looking at me like I got three heads, and I'm like, yeah, well, it was just a normal Tuesday. When the Yakuza came up to me at the bar in Roppongi, and and it was a normal day when Vitor cut his arm, and we had to trash all the work we had done, and yeah, it was a normal day when Kev was screaming and yelling at me for whatever reason. Or it was a normal day when, we were out out with Frank Shamrock the night before, getting breakfast at 4 a.m. in the Waffle House and the show the next day. Or, stuff like that happened all the time. And it was really
Yeah.
cool. So it's fun to reminisce um, and we'll see. Maybe I get John Peretti involved. I think John would be another guy that could really bring a lot to the table and obviously has a lot of opinions and a lot of exposure from those early days. Might provide a good counterpoint to my point. I was the office guy. John was the outside matchmaker. I was the promoter, producer, businessman. He was the fight guy. So we'll see. We'll see. I'd be curious to think of what I'd be curious to hear what people would think about that, and if they'd listen or tune into something. If me and John Peretti did a podcast talking about the old school
Oh, I'm sure they would, because
UFC
I
MMA
see he's been
days.
doing some stuff on Lights Out podcast, you know.
Yep, yep. John's been out there, and I think it's the same as me. Like we haven't talked about it in so long, and why not? These stories are going to go when we go, and there's a lot of fun things and cool things and important things and historical things that happened in those days that set things up so that the sport could achieve, the organization could achieve the success that it has, right? If we don't go through those tough times, those dark days, all those blood, sweat, and tears, who knows? Who knows?
Yeah. It's always fascinating talking to you. That's why I
It's
think it'd
my
be
pleasure.
great for you to have a podcast, because
I'd love some
you have a lot
feedback.
of knowledge. I think, that one show we did where you were talking about from the promoter's point of view. This is something I try
Mm,
to do with my shows, is to let people who have the experience educate people,
yeah, yeah,
educate
and it's
me.
fun. Like I said, I like talking about it, and it's fun for me, but I don't know if it's interesting. You like it, and that's cool. And you're an old school guy, and I love that, and I appreciate that. And I thank you for inviting me on. It's my pleasure, and I'm happy to come on at any time. These are fun conversations for me. But I wonder, does anyone care? Does anyone care what James Werme and John Peretti have to
I
say
think they
about the
would.
early
I think
days?
they would, yeah.
Let's
I
hear it.
would
I want to
definitely
hear from the
promote it on
fans.
my show for sure.
Well, if any fans out there feel strongly one way or the other, tell Todd, and he'll let me know. But it's an idea we're kicking around. I think it would be fun and cool. I don't know how many people would listen.
Oh,
I know that
I
I
think
know
it'd
that
gain
I know
traction.
you're talking about unprecedented access. Between me and John in those days, there was not a room where something important was going on, where each of us or both of us weren't in the room. So you're talking about unprecedented access. And obviously, John had Extreme, his show. And then, I did 40 shows with the UFC between 95 and 2002. I was the only employee that crossed over with ZUFFA, moved with the show from New York to Las Vegas. So a lot of pivotal, important times, 4 Japan shows, the first New Jersey show, first Vegas show. Yeah, a lot of material there. We'll see.
Plus, you have access to people that your average person may not.
Right.
That familiar with, which is something I try to do. I try to bring people on like you and other people who, were behind the scenes and maybe don't get the notoriety that they should have.
Yeah, and I think we could, if we did this, especially if John's involved, we could really get heavyweight guests from those days, and of course, names like Frank Shamrock and Tito Ortiz and Maurice Smith and Boss Root, Mark Coleman and Big John McCarthy, and I'm pretty sure we could get those guys. The more I talk about it, the more excited I get about it.
Yeah.
We'll see. We'll see. I'd love to hear what people think about that idea.
No, I think it's a no-brainer. All right. Well, I appreciate coming on, saving the live today.
My pleasure, Todd. Anytime. I thank you for the invitation. I'm happy to do it whenever you want to chat. I'm available. Thanks everyone for listening.
And always great talking to you.
Likewise, my friend.
Check out James Werme, and
my Twitter is
possibly coming.
At James A. Werme, at JamesAWERME.
That's where I found him.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks a lot, man.
Yeah. Appreciate it.
You got it. Take care.
Have a good one.
You too.
This is the Todd Atkins Show, okay? We're talking about Todd Atkins. I've known him for a very long time. Fantastic person. Handsome person and a really tough guy, okay? You're talking about a tough guy. He talks about combat sports. You're looking at Colby Covington. Fantastic people in combat sports. And Todd Atkins is a highly respected person. He talks about it all the time. He's got a great show. You're watching the greatest show, okay? The Todd Atkins Show, and you're watching it. I would not want to pick a fight with Todd. I would not want to pick a fight with Todd, so don't miss it. He's got the greatest people and the greatest show. Not like the fake news, okay? He's a great show, highly respected, and you don't want to miss it, believe me.